The idea of the talk is it was initially a sort of behind the scenes, bit more information on our film Pamir to Karakoram, which is also showing as part of the film festival. But I would like to make it a bit more interactive. I'd like to make it more relevant to you guys. Obviously, it's quite difficult when you're not here. We can't do a show of hands, how much experience different people have. So it's essentially going to be a run through of what our trip was like, with a bit about how we prepared for it, how we got the inspiration, and some pointers that we learned along the way that I hope will be relevant for you guys. Then I'll run through the trip and what we learned from it, some anecdotes which we haven't been able to include in the film. And then at the end, it'll be over to you guys to ask all your questions, whether they're about cycle touring in general, this part of the world, making a film while you're cycling, anything that you have to ask. So hopefully you'll find it useful and interesting. I'm hoping it won't be like a kind of one of those slideshow presentations when people get back from holidays and make you sit through it. I'm hoping it'll be a bit more interesting and interactive than that, but here it goes. So a little bit about me. My background is in medicine. I discovered the career of expedition medicine quite soon after I graduated, and launched myself into that. I've been lucky to accompany different trekking and cycling groups all around the world. It's a bit on pause at the moment because of obviously the crisis all around the world, but that's a big part of what I do. I'm training to be a remote and rural GP up in the Highlands in Scotland. I do a lot of my own adventure traveling, like this presentation, like this cycle trip that I'm going to be speaking about. And I also run a travel blog over at .com, which shares our adventures, lets you guys keep up to date with what we are up to. But I also try and put some articles on there about, useful information, things that we've learned, particularly when we're in the country, that if you were to go there and trek or cycle, then that would be useful for you guys as well, hopefully. And that's my Instagram and Facebook handle down at the bottom there as well, if you want to keep up to date with our adventures. This is Antoine, who isn't here. Well, he's here, he's around somewhere, but he's not presenting today because we've just decided that with the language barrier, it's a bit easier for him to do the things in France, me to do the things in English-speaking countries. It's just a little bit less stressful for all of us. But this presentation wouldn't be anything without him. He is, I like to think first and foremost, my husband, and that's probably not what he thinks of as his primary role, but he is our photographer, and on this trip was our filmmaker. He has got an amazing eye for photography, for capturing the moment, for capturing things that we've experienced when we're cycling, and I think the film really captures what we went through, what we lived when we were on the trip, and I'm really, really grateful to him for that. He's also a ski, snowboard and mountain bike instructor, and we're based half of the year, more or less, in France, in the Valley of Chamonix. Although this year it's obviously been a really complicated winter, so we're not there at the moment. His Instagram is Cotiche, probably more worthwhile following him than me, since I really just repost the photos that he takes. And that's his Facebook page as well, where we also publish some of his photos. So a little bit of background. How did we get to the stage of doing this tour? Because the Pamir to Karakoram was actually our first real cycle tour. And obviously it's quite a remote, quite a big thing to take on when you haven't done that before. So we've travelled quite a lot and quite a lot together. We have travelled to a variety of different places where we were mostly trekking. We realised quite early on, this is on the left-hand side, that's us in Norway. That was one of our first trips together back in 2017, I think. And we realised that we loved being lost in the mountains. That's what really made a trip for us. It was seeing the rawness of nature and not seeing a lot of other people, essentially. So from there, that sort of built momentum. In the top right-hand corner, that's us trekking. We did a self-propelled kind of autonomous trek in the Ladakh region in the north of India. And in the bottom right, that's us doing the same sort of thing in Peru. We did a few other trips around the same time, which were of a similar theme. And we just love that feeling of being in the middle of nowhere, of walking for days and not seeing anyone. But we started to get just a little bit frustrated that we weren't seeing as much as we might want to see. We started to think maybe we wanted to move faster, see more, multiple countries, see more of a country. And at the same time, we started wondering, well, if we take a van, it really changes the trip. You don't get to interact with people the same way. And then it sort of came to us naturally, why not travel by bicycle? You're still out there, you're still interacting with the people, and you can still be lost if you pick the right countries, but you just see that bit more, a little bit faster. So how did we choose the route? We take a lot of hitchhikers actually when we're traveling around, and we always make the point of asking them if they've traveled a lot, what's their favorite place and why. And the names of Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Central Asia, they kept coming up. People talked about how beautiful it was, how remote it was, how friendly the people were. At the same time, Pakistan has always been a kind of dream for us to go and see the biggest glaciers outside of the polar regions, to go and see these huge mountains like K2. And then once we had realised that we wanted to cycle by bicycle, we started to look at routes in these areas, and the names of Pamir Highway and Karakoram Highway kept popping up. And suddenly we realised they were actually quite close to each other. They're both parts of the old Silk route. And suddenly it seemed like, oh, we can find a way to join those two routes together. And from there, it was kind of decided. It was quite clear. So we had a route. We knew that we wanted to cycle by bike, but we'd never done that before. We had never really done any kind of long distance cycling. We didn't have really any idea of where to start. So this book, I'm sure loads of you are familiar with it, but if you're not and you're thinking of doing a cycle tour, I would recommend it 100%. It was my Bible for weeks. I just carried it around everywhere. It was always in my handbag. I was underlining and highlighting every second word in the book. It talks about everything. It's got rough routes for everywhere, each continent it goes by. But it also has really useful sections on how to choose what kind of bike, because we didn't know, should we take a mountain bike? Should we take a gravel bike? Should we take panniers? Should we have a frame bag set up? So we spent weeks reading through this book, making pros and cons lists of everything. And then we kind of started to get an idea of what we were going to do. So on the left there, that's us with our bikes. We decided to go for steel-framed gravel touring bikes. A touring bike is essentially a gravel bike, but it's got more fixation points usually for things like panniers, water holders, things like that. And we went for the Specialized Sequoia, which I think unfortunately has now been discontinued. We also had a slightly unusual setup in terms of the luggage that we had. We wanted to try and go for a bike packing setup because we knew that the roads would be quite broken, and we wanted to try and cover reasonable distances each day. So we thought that the bike packing setup would allow us the most comfort and kind of the fastest way to cycle without resistance. Unfortunately, we ended up just with not enough space because we were traveling to really remote places where we were sometimes going to have to carry 4, 5, 6 days worth of food at a time. We thought we were going to have to carry quite a lot of water, and we had all our cooking, tent, sleeping stuff with us. So we just didn't have enough space. So we decided that we were going to need panniers as well. And when we looked into whether it was better to have front panniers or back panniers, we decided that front panniers were the better option for us. They offered slightly better stability on downhill. They offered slightly better handling of the bike. and also for the constant up and down that we were going to be doing, and the sections where we'd have to push our bikes. That was just the slightly better option for us, and it was a really comfortable setup. We really enjoyed it. On the top right there, that is our tent. If you're looking for a tent and you don't have one yet, I can 100% recommend it. We've had a few different tents out the years. This is an MSR Access 3, so it's a 3-person tent, a 4-season tent, which means you can use it in winter, and it weighs only 2.2 kilos. And Antoine, who's pretty close to 6 foot, can sit up comfortably in the middle of the tent. It's really roomy. We love it. And on the bottom there, that is me cold and cooking. We'll actually come back to this photo later on in the presentation, but it's just to say that for this area, we chose a multi-fuel stove, which runs on petrol, kerosene, all those different fuels, just because gas canisters were not going to be an option for us. A little word on visas for anyone that's considering overland transport, particularly in this area. Visas can be quite a tricky part. For Central Asia, they make their visa system very easy. Tajikistan was an online visa. Kyrgyzstan, we didn't need a visa. For China and Pakistan, it was a bit more tricky. For both of those, we decided to apply before we left. It's just simpler if you can do it from your home country. So definitely, if that's an option, I would recommend it. For both countries, we needed proof of return flights to get our visa. Obviously, we weren't planning to fly there. So a little trick that I learned along the way is if you log on to Expedia.com, the American site, none of its other country variants, so not .uk or any of that, they offer a range of fully refundable flights. You can get a refund within 24 hours. So what we do is we buy our ticket, we print the PDF to send to the embassies, and then we cancel our ticket. It's probably not totally, I don't know, legal, or I maybe shouldn't be recommending it, but that is how we do it. For Pakistan as well, you'll need a letter of invitation if you're going overland, because their e-visa, I believe, doesn't work at the land borders. And you can contact companies in Pakistan to get that sorted for you. You can, I think I've got a link to that on my website, or you can post a question at the end if you want more detail on that. But if you Google companies which offer letter of invitation, then that should be fine. Also, just to mention, if you're going overland to either of these countries, don't say that in your visa application. Just stick to a very generic itinerary in and around Islamabad or Beijing, and everything will go through fine. I'm just going to, because it's starting to make quite a lot of noise. So the preparations were underway. We had chosen all of our setup. We had spent months and months of planning, and finally it was the moment to go and do the trip. So we were so excited. It just felt like such a relief to stop looking at computer screens and reading books and reading other people's blog articles. And finally, it was our turn to go. So we started in the town of Dushanbe, which is the capital of Tajikistan. It's a funny city. It's a kind of mix of these ornate buildings that you can see behind you in the screen there, and a very Soviet kind of Russian setup. But already the people were so friendly just in the city itself. So we were really looking forward to getting out on the road. And that's what we came for. We came here to cycle. And the first day that we cycled out of Dushanbe, it just felt like all the weight lifted off of our shoulders. Suddenly all these things that we've been worried about, visas, route planning, all these different things were behind us, and all we had to worry was running and cycling, and it felt amazing. And even better, the first night ended just in the most perfect way. We started to get a bit tired, and we'd find a hotel on our map, and when we got into the village we couldn't see any signs of a hotel. We went into a little shop to buy some food, and we asked if they knew where the hotel was. And the father and son who had the shop started to chat amongst themselves in Tajik, and then they invited us to sleep in their home for the night. We had about 10 people in with us, most of them from the family, a few friends from the little village. And one of the daughters was learning English at school, so she had her book of all the phrases that she learned at school, and we just had such a lovely exchange. They taught us some useful words in Tajik as well, which served us for the rest of the trip. So that was just the perfect way to end the night. And from there, we decided to take the more northern route on the Pamir Highway. It's the traditional part of the Pamir Highway, but it's now no longer serviced, so it's no longer maintained, which we knew about in advance, but I don't think I had really thought about the reality of what that would mean in terms of the road surfaces, and also in terms of just how lost an area we were going to be going into. But as you can see, it's just breathtaking, huge mountains, lush greenery. You can see, in fact, all of these flat green areas at the side of the road. They were just perfect for camping. So it felt a little bit like paradise at the start. We were still in quite low altitude. I think we were around the 2,000 meter mark. So it was warm, it was green, there's water everywhere. It was so easy to find a spot to camp on. It just felt like a bit of a dream. The downsides, obviously, as I've mentioned already, were the roads. I had never really done any off-road biking since I was a child, cycling through forests. I've never done any mountain biking, so I was really already out of my comfort zone with a bike of about 40 kilograms, and cycling on these bumpy surfaces. And things got worse, and at times it wasn't even possible to cycle bike, but it was always beautiful. There were always friendly people on the road with you. And this is as we have just spent the night in the home of the village doctor. And this is just before our very first pass. So this is the only pass on the northern section of the Pamir, the disused section. And it's the Sagardasht Pass. It's 3,260 meters. So one of the smaller passes that we would do, but at this early stage in the journey, we weren't acclimatized yet. So it was pretty tough going. And at this point, we still felt it was warm and the roads were dry. So we got up in the morning, we were looking forward to doing our first pass, and we couldn't have expected how difficult it would be. In fact, as we climbed up maybe even a couple of hundred meters in altitude out of the village, the snow just got deeper and deeper and deeper at the side of the road. And as it was spring, it was all melting. So it was all running down the road, and the mud was so thick that it built up on the wheels, and the wheels actually stopped being able to turn. So we're having to stop maybe every 15-20 minutes to try and clean the mud out of our tires just to keep the bikes and just to be able to push them. Cycling was impossible, and we were battling with the altitude. It looked sunny, but it was really, really cold. So it was a tough day. And I love this sign. It's in the film as well, but I think a lot of people miss it. So after Russia left Tajikistan, it was really, really heavily mined. And there are still a few areas where they haven't managed to get in and remove all of the landmines. So this was one area, and luckily we saw this sign before Antoine wandered off for a pee. But I love how clear it is. I mean, it's you could understand that in every language. I think it's brilliant. And this is us on the way down. So this is similar to the amount of snow that we went through on the way up, although the road down was less muddy, but we weren't in the mood to take any pictures or film clips on the way up. It was pretty difficult. So then we descended down from this pass, and we arrived in the village of Karakoram, and it felt so surreal. So we'd been for a week completely lost. We'd seen no tourists, almost no cars, and just very, very small villages which still live with their livestock, and they're growing their own crops. And then we came back down into this little village which had a supermarket, it had a 4 or 5-star hotel, which we didn't stay in. And in our hostel that night, we bumped into some tourists who were doing the Pamir Highway in a jeep. And they explained to us that they'd left Dushanbe that morning and they'd driven here to Karakoram, and that tomorrow they were going to start the Pamir highway. So they hadn't stopped except for to eat lunch. And that was just the moment that I knew that we'd made the right decision to do this trip by bicycle, because we had lived this adventure with all these challenges and all these interactions with people, a whole week of our life. And these people had just driven out of Dushanbe and stopped and hadn't seen or interacted with anything. So that just let me know that cycling in this region is the perfect way to do it. So when we came out of Karakoram, we were now running alongside the Afghan border, and the Panj River, which you can see in the photo, is the only thing that separates Afghanistan, which is on the right-hand side of the river, from Tajikistan, which is on the left-hand side. And for me, that just felt really magical. Afghanistan, growing up, I read quite a lot of books that were set in Afghanistan, different people's stories about different wars and different things that had happened in the country. And it just felt like this really faraway place. And suddenly I was just on the other side of a river from it. And it felt really magical. And the whole way along, you could always see Afghanistan on the right-hand side. It seemed almost like this little paradise compared to the Tajik side. It had these snow-capped mountains underneath. It was really, really green. It was much more basic. The houses often didn't have windows, and they almost never had electricity going to them. And the road was even smaller and more destroyed than on the Tajik side. But it was always more green. And we were cycling through this canyon with a cliff, the sheer cliffside, for 3 days. And on the Afghan side, there were just these fields. We were so tempted to just swim across the river and camp in Afghanistan, but it didn't seem like a very good idea. And that was the downside to this section, was that we were in this canyon. And as you can see in all these pictures that I've just brought up, there was nowhere really that we could pitch our tent, that we could sleep at night. And there also weren't very many towns or very many villages along the way, because there wasn't any space for them. So it meant that we were doing really, really long days. We were doing about 80 kilometers, 85 kilometers on really broken roads with a lot of up and down. So we were cycling for 12 hours a day easily, plus stopping for lunch and things. And it was really difficult to find somewhere to sleep at the end of the day. So we were often getting in when it was dark. One time we just basically had to pitch our tent in the middle of kind of flat space in the middle of a village, because there wasn't anywhere else that we could sleep. But the flip side to that was that we arrived in Korog a bit earlier than we had expected to, which was an amazing feeling. Korog is quite luxurious after the rest of what we had been through. I remember we got to the hostel and we took all of our bags off the bike and tried to cycle for dinner. And we couldn't control the bikes anymore, because they'd gone from being 40, 50 kilograms to being like just a normal bike. But it was really, really nice to stop for a few days in Korog to eat good food. And we also had the opportunity to go to the Afghan market, which is once a week. And it's a tradition that the traders from Afghanistan, they come across a kind of rope suspension bridge just outside of Korog, and they bring their items to sell in Tajikistan, which is historically slightly wealthier than the Wakhan area of Afghanistan. We were a bit disappointed with the market itself. There were actually quite a lot of kind of plastic made in China items for sale, but the people were really, really friendly. In Tajikistan, English isn't very widely spoken. However, the people that came over from Afghanistan spoke really good English. So we were able to drink a tea with them, eat some snacks with different people, and really have a nice exchange. At one point, we were in a little restaurant drinking tea with a group of men, and the women were at the table just behind us, and they were shouting across all these questions like, were we married? Did we have children? Why did we not have children yet? What was wrong with us? And these poor men were so embarrassed having to translate their thing into English that the women were asking. But it was a really, really nice day, and a really nice experience to be able to meet people who'd come over from Afghanistan. After Korog, we headed into what's known as the eastern section of the Pamir Highway, And it really is desolate. The villages are much, much further apart. You see a lot less people, and it's also noticeably colder. You're now heading much higher in altitude, and most of the section is above kind of 3,500, 4,000 meters. And it really starts to feel much more like the big mountains. This is our first night sleeping above 4,000 meters, and that's us enjoying the very last rays of sunshine before it starts really, really getting cold. This is the photo that we saw earlier, and here I just want to point out this is a very traditional dinner. So we took with us, I think, 4 emergency freeze-dried meals in case we needed them, but the rest of the time we tried to buy food as we went along, which was difficult, but in most of the villages, I'd say in every second or every third village, we managed to find a very small shop, and the choice of what we could buy was limited more or less to what you can see in this picture. So there I'm cooking rice with some eggs, and you could usually find a tin of chopped tomatoes, and either, as we're eating tonight, peas, or you could sometimes find sweet corn if you wanted to mix it up a bit. And that is essentially what we ate every lunchtime and every dinner when we weren't able to find a restaurant, which was quite often. And you can see in the middle of the bottles just behind me, it's filled with biscuits. And the Tajik people love biscuits. So even in the smallest of shops, you'll always find a selection of different biscuits. So that's what we lived on to give us energy as snacks in between meals, and to kind of supplement the taste of very, very, very bland food every day. So this is the next morning. Antoine has kindly gotten up and done his morning duties, so I'm tucking into a nice hot cup of tea before we go up and over our first pass above 4,000 meters. So this is us looking very happy with ourselves. We have just done the Koitazak Pass, which is 4,270 meters. And the roads were actually quite nice. You can see here they're broken dirt roads, but they were pretty flat. And we were starting to get acclimatized now. So we were a bit out of breath on the way up, but noticeably easier than the lower pass that was covered in snow beforehand. And from this moment on, the scenery just seemed to change. So this is us just beyond the pass. We're now on a high plateau, which you can see stretches really, really far into the distance and stays well above 4,000 meters. And it's just so vast, and the colors are just different to anywhere else I'd ever seen. And you just don't see anyone. There's no one else on that whole road with us. It just felt so remote and so beautiful. And that's really the image of the Pamir that's stayed with me. You can see this is as still well up above 4,000 meters. It's wide, it's flat, it's really just unlike anywhere else that I've been. That night we made quite good time. Actually, we thought it was going to be a long day, but with the reasonable roads, we made good time. So we decided to make a detour. And we came, this is the village of Bulankul, which is reputed to be the coldest area in the whole of the Pamir. So we were a little bit worried to be there so early in the season. And as you can see, we arrived pretty late. And that is because the entire road to get to Bulankul is made of sand, which is quite tricky when your bikes are 40 and 50 kilos because they sink in the sand. So that was a really tough end to the day. But when we woke up the next day, we knew that we'd made the right decision. We were in this tiny, tiny little village in the middle of nowhere next to this beautiful lake and just surrounded by snow-capped mountains. It was really incredible. And everyone in the village was just so friendly. And this is Bulankul Lake behind us. And this is one of our very rare drone images that we still have. And this is looking from where we've just come from Bulankul towards Alishur, which will be our next village. And as you can see, the colours, the vastness of the landscape is just breathtaking. I think for both of us, this is one of the highlights of the trip. it felt the whole day, we didn't even notice the effort of being on the bike because it was just so, so beautiful. This area is around a tectonic plate, I think it's called. So there's hot springs, there's geysers. It was just really felt like another world. And this is basically just a nice picture of the bikes, but illustrates quite nicely the setup that I was talking about earlier. So that's our bike packing setup with the front rack, the back seat pack, and the frame pack, and then the panniers. And this is us. We've just come out of Bulancool. We camped the night before and it started snowing. So the next day we cycled the very short distance into Alisher to try and shelter from the snow and hailstorm. And we actually stumbled across the first person in Tajikistan who spoke fluent English. So it was amazing. The storm actually lasted the whole day. So we just stayed in his restaurant. We ate breakfast, lunch, and dinner in the same restaurant. And we asked all of our questions that we'd had from the start of the trip that no one had been able to answer. We took the time to learn more phrases in Tajik. And we just passed a really, really nice day with the family in the restaurant. They helped us with our bicycle repairs. They helped us top up with petrol for the stove because we were running low. And then they invited us to sleep in their house that night, even though I'm pretty sure they had a hotel. And that's just really typical of the level of hospitality that we encountered the whole way along. So this is the next day heading towards Murghab, and I am smiling because it's the first and I think only day of the trip that we had the wind behind us. So we are zooming along there on good roads. This is the Nizatash Pass, which is 4,140 meters, and we didn't even feel that we went over it. We just flew along with the wind behind us, really well acclimatized now. And this is us arriving in Murghab. So Murghab is reputed to be quite a stoical city, and it's quite famous for its shipping container market. So this that you can see before you is the market for the city or the town, and it's built entirely out of shipping containers. It just has a really end of the world feel to it. You know that this is a town that survives really just on the willpower and the grit of the people. They're really far from anywhere. They have really harsh winters. And they don't have a lot, but they make the most of it, and everyone is really friendly, and the market was really quite a good experience, so definitely recommend. So now we're heading out of Murghab and still continuing on our route towards Kyrgyzstan. We're now climbing up towards the Agbaital Pass, which is the highest pass on the Pamir highway. And this whole day we had a headwind. So you can see Antoine stopped to take this beautiful photo, and I haven't even stopped. I'm still on the bike doing about 3 or 4 kilometers an hour with this headwind rushing down from the pass and slowing us down. But we made it. We made it up and over the pass. So 6,555 meters. It's the highest pass on the Pamir and should have been the second highest pass that we did on the trip, but I'll explain a bit more about that later. So that's us, again, another rare drone image from the pass. So we made it up in really good time. The road was actually quite good, and we are expecting now to sail down the other side and reach Karakoram Lake. But that is me looking very, very, very unhappy and walking my bike downhill, which is quite a rare occurrence on the trip. But what you can see in this photo is the famous corrugations, which we talk about quite a lot in the film. And you'll definitely hear other people that have done the Pamir on bike talking about these as well. They're basically, with the poor road surface, the harsh conditions and the volume of traffic that goes over them, just lots and lots of ruts in the road, and they are just exactly the wrong size for a bicycle tire. They just explode the bikes. The bags were flapping around, hitting the frame. They were smashed to pieces. They hurt your wrists, they're bum tapping on the saddle, they are just miserable, and there's no speed that you can get to where they're more comfortable to go over. There's no technique that we found that makes them any nicer. So that is me looking quite ready to cry and walking my bike down. So now it's gone from what we thought would be sailing down, reaching Karakoram Lake, to turning into really quite a long, difficult, demoralising day. But just a little bit before reaching Karakoram Lake, we pop onto a section of unexpected tarmac, which just lifted our spirits. It's probably one of the best feelings when you've had a day like that and you expect it's going to continue, and 10, 15 kilometres earlier than expected, you suddenly reach this good road surface. So another good surprise, we came into the little village of Karakoram, and we saw a tiny little sign advertising a traditional homestay in a yurt. So now we're really close to the Kyrgyz border, and the Kyrgyz culture is much stronger here. A lot of the people are ethnically Kyrgyz, so they often live in yurts or live part of the year in yurts, which is less common amongst the Tajik people. And again, this was another moment that I was just so grateful to be there on bicycle, because the sign was so small and we met so many people that had travelled by jeep or by car that hadn't even noticed this yurt when they went past it. And we decided to stay 2 nights in the yurt and really enjoy just being at Lake Karakoram. It was so, so beautiful. And this is now, I think, getting into June, early June time, and the lake's still frozen. So I can only imagine how short a period this lake thaws for. And again, you can see the village behind. This is the tiny little village of Karakoram, and it's another really lost, really isolated village, just full of people that are so friendly and so happy to share and exchange different points of view, and it was a really, really good experience. So this is the border post in Tajikistan, and like much of Tajikistan, they make the best of what they have. So it's all in tiny little rundown huts. They didn't have any electricity when we were there, but the people were friendly and warm. They gave us chocolates, they made us a cup of tea, which I've never had at any other border post in my life. So it was just the perfect parting image of Tajikistan for us. Then we crossed into Kyrgyzstan, and from the little town just across the border, this is Saritash is the name of the border post, and on kind of first impressions, it doesn't look very different from Tajikistan, but here we have tarmac roads. All of the roads that we cycled on in Kyrgyzstan were tarmacked, really well surfaced, and we also found a hostel with Wi-Fi, which was the first time in about a month that we'd managed to connect to the internet. So we took the time. Our plan had been to go to the base camp of Peak Lenin, trek up to there, and then cycle onto Osh, which is the traditional endpoint of the Pamir highway, before doubling back on ourselves and heading across to the Karakoram. But when we checked the weather, there were storms all around us. So there was a storm all the way towards Peak Lenin, and the weather heading north up to Osh was just dismal as well. The only weather that wasn't really a huge snowstorm was if we headed towards China, and forgot about the 2 other extensions. So we discussed the options. We felt quite disappointed, actually, especially not to go up to Osh. But in the end, we decided that we would just lose too much time. We wouldn't see anything, it would just be a bit miserable. And so we decided to cut straight across towards the Chinese border. So for any of you that have seen the film, you'll know that this was not my favourite day of the trip. We headed out from Saritash expecting to have reasonable weather. We expected that it would stay dry. We also expected that it would mostly be downhill because the village of Urkistan at the border was significantly lower than where we were starting out from. Unfortunately, you can see the storm clouds are gathering behind us. And I am also cycling uphill. So there was an unexpected pass between the two towns, which we weren't prepared for, mentally more than anything. And we also got hit with a horrendous snowstorm. I sometimes have quite a lot of difficulty breathing in cold weather at altitude. I think quite a lot of people have it where you get a kind of wheeze where it hurts your lungs to breathe. And just with all of the factors, with this snowstorm, with the uncertainty of how long it was now going to take us to get to Urkistan, with the fact that we were just cold, we didn't know where we were going to sleep, all of it just got on top of me. And with this difficulty with my breathing, I really wasn't in a good place. I didn't want to be there anymore. I couldn't see any good reason to still be on this trip, to be suffering, to be so far from home, to be putting ourselves in the way of danger. And I couldn't rationalize it and see the good points of the trip. But we got down to the bottom of the pass, and we managed to speak with some of the soldiers at the military checkpoint, and they welcomed us in, gave us some tea and some biscuits, and we had a good conversation with them, and that just really helped. Once we were warm again, I could start to remember all the good parts of the trip, all the things that were still to come, and that really just helped us so much to continue with the trip. So this is us now at the border town before China, which is the town of Urkistan. And as you can see in the picture, that is the queue of trucks waiting to cross the border. And we're still a couple of kilometres away from the border. So we had not realised, but the Chinese border closes at the weekend, certainly the one with Kyrgyzstan. So we arrived on Saturday midday, and we couldn't leave until Monday morning. So in the film, we talk a little bit, we were put up with some of the border guards who at the start were really friendly, just like all the people we'd met in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan so far. They welcomed us into their home. They actually insisted on phoning our parents via WhatsApp, and they FaceTimed them. And Antoine's dad thought that we'd been kidnapped, that someone was phoning for a ransom message, because the signal was so bad. He could just see this picture on the screen of this guy he didn't know with Antoine next to him. And they were so friendly. They were kind of pointing at all these things and teaching our parents different words in Kyrgyz. And then the next day we got up, things seemed fine, but then one of the border guards just became really grumpy, really short with us. He kept bursting into our room and just saying things in Kyrgyz that we didn't understand. And in the end, towards late afternoon, he just told us to leave, that there were people coming, they needed the room. So we don't talk about that in the film just because we don't have the video footage that goes with it. But it was quite a strange experience, and the whole town was just a bit strange. It's also, there's a lot of coal transport that comes to the area, so there's loads of trucks going in and out, even the ones that aren't going across the border, and it's all quite run down and dirty. So it was a really strange way to spend the weekend, and things didn't get much better when we crossed the Chinese border. You're not allowed to cross kind of on your own steam. You're not allowed to walk across, you're not allowed to cycle across. So we had to pay quite a lot of money. I think it was around $300 for the two of us on our bikes, but I don't remember exactly. And then we had to do a really long journey in a kind of official taxi. Then we had to do loads of, we had to stop 2 separate times to have all of our luggage checked. They checked our telephones, they inspected all of our bags. We had to go through multiple passport controls. It's quite a politically sensitive area in China that we were going into. And it meant that we had expected to get to be back on the bikes basically by lunchtime. But by the time we got through, it was maybe 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and we didn't have any money. Because it's such a politically sensitive area, we weren't allowed to just go out. There weren't any ATMs nearby. And it was all turning out to be quite stressful because they didn't seem like they were going to let us cycle to Kashgar because it was so late on, but we didn't have money to pay for the only hotel that we were allowed to stay in. So in the end, we negotiated that they let us go and eat some food. So we went and had some dinner, and then we basically just got on the bikes and cycled, and when they all started shouting at us to stop, we just ignored them and kept going. And probably perhaps a stupid thing to have done, but it worked out well. We then cycled along this perfect, pristine highway. It's like a 3-lane motorway with no other cars on it. I don't think a lot of people have permission, I guess, to cycle in that area. So we had it all to ourselves. But we kept getting stopped at different checkpoints. So I think we went through 3 or 4 different checkpoints. Each time we had to take all the bags off the bike, empty them. We were just losing so much time. But again, we didn't have any option. So we got to Kashgar just a little bit before midnight, I think, with 2 or 3 hours of cycling in pitch black. We'd had no food. We'd run out of water. It was a really, really tough afternoon. But when we got to Kashgar, it just made up for it. Kashgar is exactly what you imagine when you think of an old Silk Road trading post. It's colourful. It's full of every spice, dried food, nut, every food that you can imagine. It was just this crazy contrast between being on the Pamir in the mountains with tiny villages where we ate essentially the same thing for over a month, and then we were in this huge colourful city of I think 3 million people. It was just totally overwhelming. It felt really surreal. Not all of the food was exactly what we expected, but it was just a beautiful experience, and I would happily have just stayed there for the rest of the trip, not done the Karakoram highway, just stayed in Kashgar in a nice hotel and eaten food. But Antoine insisted that we continued. So the Chinese part of the Karakoram is really, really beautiful. It goes through really big mountains. Every day there's massive glaciers all around you, and it's really quiet because again not a lot of people have the permissions needed to drive in that area. The downside is, as I said, it's very politically sensitive, so there's no hotels in between Kashgar and the border town of Tashkurgan, which are more than 300 kilometers apart. You're not allowed to camp, and you're not allowed to stay with the local people. So pretty tricky. We knew that we would have to stealth camp. We didn't have any other option, but it meant that we tried to go as fast as we could on the good roads and minimize the number of nights that we would have to sleep out there, because we didn't know what repercussions there would be if someone caught us and we were camping. So these are just some images from the area. It's so beautiful. I just love these camels as well that were all the way along. But this is our first night sleeping. We slept out for 2 nights, and this is the first of the 2. And it actually was it just felt horrible. We had to kind of run off the road with all of our stuff, make sure no one was looking. And then we had to kind of tuck into this kind of tunnel under the road, which I think is there in case there's floodwaters coming off the mountains. So we were worried in case there was a big storm overnight. There was constant trucks going overhead, probably like 1 every hour. So we didn't sleep very well. So yeah, it wasn't the nicest for the night times, but the days were really beautiful. So this is Bulankul Lake. So the lakes have very similar names to those in Tajikistan, because this part of China was traditionally part of Central Asia, so they share kind of a culture and a language with people in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. So this is the Chinese Bulankul Lake. And these are just some images of the pristine roads going through really beautiful mountain scenery. I put this in because it's one of the very few pictures from our trip that I took. And also just, I really love this picture. These are kind of traditional hats which are worn all through the kind of Waki area, which is like the Afghan Waki corridor, Wakhan corridor in parts of Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and also the part of Pakistan that we would be going to as well. And this is the Chinese Karakoram Lake, which is very different and very much more thawed than its Tajik neighbour. And this is just another camel that was on the road. He's so cute. And just some more images from this really, really beautiful but very difficult part of the Karakoram highway. So we did it again. We managed to end up in Tashkent on Saturday afternoon, and the border between China and Pakistan was closed until Monday. Luckily, Tashkent is a slightly more touristy town. People tend to drive out from Kashgar to Tashkent, and then they visit the two lakes that we passed. So there were some hostels, and this is the tourist attraction in Tashkent, which is supposedly a very ancient fort from, I don't know how many hundreds thousands of years ago, but it's definitely been built much more recently than that out of cement, and it's not very authentic, but it was something to do on our day off. I definitely wouldn't recommend assigning any time to it if you're going there, but if you end up stuck because of the border, then it's definitely worthwhile. So this picture really sums up the whole of the Xinjiang area that we passed through. It's these huge kind of American style highways with just no one, no people, no cars. It's quite surreal. So it's the same story with the Chinese-Pakistan border. The Chinese government wouldn't let us cycle across the border. We had to take a bus, and unfortunately that meant that we wouldn't be able to cycle across the highest pass that we had hoped to cycle on our journey. This one is the Kunjara Pass, which I think is the highest international border in the world. And it's 4,693 meters, so about 50 meters higher than the highest pass that we did on the trip. And we were really pretty sad. And the worst part, this is us heading out of China, quite happy to be leaving that area. But the worst part of it was that the descent, we'd hoped to be able to do, people had told us that maybe once we passed the Chinese frontier and we were in Pakistan territory, that we would be allowed to get off the bus and cycle down. But it turns out that the rules now are that you have to go to the first border town of Sost and clear immigration, get a Pakistani stamp on your passport, and then you're allowed to cycle back up to the border if you want to. But it was just an incredible section of downhill. It was about well over 1,000 meters of down, I think maybe even close to 2,000 meters of vertical descent on these beautiful hairpins that wouldn't have been out of place in the Alps. And I was stuck in the bus. I was motion sick. It was just pretty sad. But I guess it had a silver lining. We decided not to cycle back up to the border. It seemed a bit silly to go all the way up just to cycle back down on a road that we'd already been through. So instead we started to ask around what there was to do in the area, and we found out about Chaparsan Valley. This is a valley in the very, very north of Pakistan, which goes in the direction of Afghanistan. And it's quite often closed to tourists. The part of Afghanistan that it touches is a very peaceful area. But Pakistan are just very, very keen that nothing happens to tourists in their country. So if there's any upset in Afghanistan, tension between Pakistan and Afghanistan, they close all of the valleys which head towards Afghanistan, even if there's never any trouble in them. So we were lucky. The valley had just opened up again and we didn't need any special permits or permissions to go there. And again, this is another real highlight of the trip. If you're ever heading to Pakistan on bike or any other way, I would definitely recommend checking out Chaparsan Valley. So this is just the contrast. So this is what most of the valley is like. It's very dry, very desertic, with just this river that's in a canyon at the very bottom. But the locals have an incredible system of irrigation channels, which allows them to have agriculture, it allows them to grow their own crops, and to keep livestock. And it means that every time you approach even the tiniest little village, it's green for kilometres and kilometres either side of it. It's really, really beautiful. And the locals were just so friendly. I'd been a little bit worried. I'd heard stories before I went to Pakistan that it maybe wasn't the safest, especially as a female traveling there. I was just a bit apprehensive heading out into this remote valley that no one really knew we were going to, and heading towards Afghanistan. But within about 2 hours of cycling into the valley, I just felt so comfortable. Every village that we went through, the people spoke really, really good English. They were so friendly. They would come and ask us about our plans, where we were going. By the time we got to the third village, they already knew who we were, that we were from France and Scotland, and that we were going to Zwotkun, and that we were heading to Alamjan's house, because the news was just traveling so much faster than us down the valley. And by the time we were, 5 or 6 villages in, we just felt like part of the extended family, because we'd already spoken to everyone's cousins and mothers, and they were just so, so welcoming. And this is Alam Jan. He is quite a well-known trekking guide in the region. He's taken people from Lonely Planet and different kind of international expeditions, trekking in the area. He now has health problems, so he doesn't take people trekking himself, but he will happily put you up in his house. He will arrange a guide for you. He's just a really wonderful guy with loads and loads of local knowledge. And he told us about this trek, the Pamir trek, which is really commonly done by the locals because it takes them up to high altitude grazing pastures, but isn't very well known. It's not a very touristy place to go. And he hooked us up with Sarwar, who's a good friend of his, and was our guide for the trek, because the little paths to follow are just so faint that I don't think we would have managed to make it up on our own. So we bought some cheap made in China backpacks and shoes from Sauce, the little village, before we came in, which had broken by the end of the 4-day trek. But it was really, really, really beautiful. It's a kind of sort of almost like a cul-de-sac kind of valley. And we hiked up, and this is me looking really not my best, but looking down on our last campsite along the valley that we came up. And this is us looking into kind of the end of the valley. We're up at about 4,100 meters there. And it's called the Pamiri. That's the name of the pasture that you get to, and it's also the name of one of the 7,000 meter summits which are up above us. And Sarwar on the way down picked all of these flowers and was just putting them everywhere, on him, on us, and we found this ibex skull which he's now hidden somewhere in the valley, and is going to go back and claim at some point. And these were just the night skies all the time when we were camping in Pakistan. It was just incredible. I don't think I've ever seen a Milky Way like it at any other time. So I'm aware of the time. I've been speaking for quite a long time now, so I'll just quickly run through the last little bit of our Pakistan trek. So this is us coming down to the town of Pasu. This is the Pasu Cathedral, and this is us heading out. There's a really nice trek that you can do from Pasu. It's a day trek across 2 different suspension bridges. I just love this photo. So these 2 little girls are out walking themselves, and the one that's closest to me had managed to get her little scarf caught in all of the thorns, all the brambles. So I spent about 10-15 minutes helping her untangle it all, and then we walked just basically to the edge of the picture there, and she'd managed to get it all tangled back up again. But this is the suspension bridge, and I have so much admiration for the people that live here, because if you look at how unstable this bridge is, how unsafe it looks, I can tell you it's really, really scary to walk across it. And then you look at the village, and just on the far side of the picture, just kind of before the mountains on the other side, And this is how they transport all of their goods, all of the crops that they grow, and they bring animals like lambs and things to market across this bridge. And it just is such a different way of life from anything I can imagine. And this is just quickly, we'd walked up to the Rakaposhi base camp, so that's Rakaposhi behind us. And this is our last day of cycling along the Karakoram highway before we reach Gilgit, which is where we decided to stop our cycle. And it's just like this the whole way. It's so beautiful. And it's a really narrow valley, so you feel like the mountains are really, really close to you. It's really spectacular. So we decided to stop our cycle in Gilgit because a lot of people told us there were particularly two areas after Gilgit which are quite dangerous. They are very traditional areas, and there's quite a conflict between tourists and the local way of life. So the government try and keep tourists out of that area, just to minimise impact on the local people living there, and also to minimise any harm to tourists. And if we had gone through that area, we'd have had to arrange kind of police escorts, military escorts, and it just all seemed like a lot of hassle and a potential risk that we didn't need to take. So we decided to do that section in by bus. And what you can see here, we were supposed to take the kind of tourist bus, which would have been luxury, air conditioned, and it's also timed so that it goes through the dangerous areas around, like in the middle of the night, to minimise any risk so you don't get off the bus. We had to charge our bikes onto the bus, so we had to take the cheapest bus available so that it had roof storage, and we went through the dangerous areas kind of in the middle of the day, and we stopped once for a toilet break, once for food, and once for a tea break, but we actually didn't have any issues in the area. Everyone was perfectly friendly. So then we took the bus to Islamabad, and from Islamabad we took the train down to where we have left our bikes. The plan had been to leave the bikes at my friend's house and then take them back last spring and continue our trip through Asia, through India and into Nepal. That obviously didn't happen thanks to the world pandemic, but we had a really wonderful train journey down. We left our bikes there, and we're still hoping to continue the next chapter. So that's our trip. I hope it was interesting. I hope I haven't bored you all. And I hope that it was useful to talk about some of our preparations. But I guess now over to you guys if you've got questions, if you've got any remarks from the talk at all. I'm really happy to answer them.
Thank you so much. That was such a fascinating trip to hear about, and I loved everyone's reaction to the Ripple Road and everybody saying, "Oh, I've been there. It's awful." You know, Ripple roads around the world that I have suffered was great on the chat. Yeah, really inspiring stuff. You've got so many questions. I'm not sure we're going to be able to get through them all, but I've sort of tried to group them a little bit. So okay. I'm going to throw some at you, some quick ones to start us off. A few people asking you just to say again, what time of year was it and how long was your trip overall?
So we were there in May, which is actually quite early for the Pamir highway, but it just coincided with the end of the ski season for Antoine's work. And I was restarting a year of work in August, so that's just the time that we had. We assigned 3 months for the trip, but we actually did it in 2, including the trekking that we did.
Okay. And there's always, as always, a lot of gear questions. So there was 3 separate questions. Did you consider fat bikes? If you went again, would you take a mountain bike? And did you consider a tandem? So we've got both ends of the spectrum there, from fat bike to tandem. Any thoughts on that?
So tandem, first of all, we never even considered it. We If we go kayaking, we take our own kayaks. We went in a double kayak once on a very short journey. I'm pretty sure we're close to divorce. It just doesn't work well for us. We are much better going at our own rhythm. I couldn't imagine already spending, 2 months, just the two of you on a trip like that. But at least during the day, if you're on your separate bikes, you can kind of cycle at your own pace, your own rhythm, have some peace and quiet. If you run a tandem, you'd be like stuck together all the time. And the other thing is, from a practical point of view, for a tandem, you've got half as much storage space, unless you take a trailer, which I don't think would have been practical on those roads. So in terms of, especially because we were filming, we had really quite a lot of film equipment with us. We just wouldn't have had space for all of our equipment on a tandem. We often get the question about mountain bikes and why did we take the bikes that we did? Did we regret taking the bikes that we did? And actually, I don't think we do regret taking them. We chose the gravel bikes because they're faster on the asphalt sections, and the steel frames absorb a bit more of the shock from the broken road sections. And it definitely would have been more comfortable on the broken sections of the Pamir to have a mountain bike. That's clear. But it would have been much more difficult to get luggage onto a mountain bike. You need to get a lot of custom built things. Panniers are trickier. And for all of the Karakoram and the section in Kyrgyzstan, to be on a mountain bike, we would have been so slow that I think that would have been more frustrating than the sections on the broken roads. So I think we would make the same choice again.
Such a compromise, isn't it? Choice.
Yeah, there's never a perfect solution.
Okay, and then there's taking the kit over to the photography. So people asking, it seems like you had a drone. Which drone did you take? Which camera did you take? And how did you charge all of that kind of kit?
Yeah, so Antoine is the photographer and the filmmaker. So in terms of kind of technical questions, I can try and answer them. But if I can't answer them properly, then feel free to send us a message through social media or the website if you really are interested in those, and he will reply to you. In terms of, we did take a drone. If you watch the film, you'll see that didn't end very well. But we had a Mavic Air. I think there's another thing that goes on the end of that tells you which model it's. But it was a very small drone, and it's now, for our last trip, we replaced our drone, and we took a DJI Mavic Mini, which is even smaller, and Antoine seemed to think that it was even better. It's a bit cheaper, a bit more resistant to the wind, but again, if you want specifics, it's probably better to send us a message and we'll reply to those. In terms of charging, the only thing that we couldn't charge in autonomy was the drone batteries. They were too strong, the current that went through them. But camera batteries, we had an Osmo Pocket, which we did quite a lot of filming with, and the GoPro, we could charge all of those with, what we did was we took 2 solar panels, 2 external batteries, and we charged the external batteries from the solar panel, and then we charged our equipment from the external battery to avoid kind of the wear and tear of the equipment battery with the solar panel if it dropped, if it was cutting current all of the time. But we managed to charge most things that way quite easily, and then whenever we stayed anywhere that had electricity, we would charge the drone batteries.
Thank you. Brilliant. Someone's just made a point that it'd be good if you could stop screen sharing at this point so that people can see you more clearly whilst you're answering the questions, if that's possible. Okay, a few more then. Moving on to the sort of medic theme. So someone's asking, what's an expedition medic? And really interesting question about whether you thought the pace and physiology of cycling helped with acclimatization. And there was also a question, that's probably enough actually, I'll leave you with those two.
Sorry, I didn't quite understand the question about the physiology.
So do you think the pace and sort of physiology of cycling helps you to acclimatise to the altitude more easily?
Okay. I actually would say the opposite. From my experience of trekking at altitude and cycling at altitude, I find it easier to reduce the amount of effort trekking. You can walk slower. It's easier to tell yourself that you're going to take a break. I find it easier to drink when I'm trekking. On a bike, especially because as we were going up to the passes, it was often quite steep. I find myself much more often out of breath, going a bit faster than I probably should have. And I think both of us suffered a bit more with mild headaches, loss of appetite and things like that on the bicycle trip compared to when we've been trekking in the past. Yeah, so I actually would say the opposite.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point with the drinking, actually.
Yeah.
It's harder to keep on top of it on a bike, isn't it?
And sorry, what was the other question?
And then one about your thoughts on sort of COVID and touring in times of COVID, and you mentioned earlier that you've got plans to head off again soon.
Yeah.
I guess just what are the issues that you anticipate in the months to come?
So it's a really tricky issue, and I think a lot of people have different opinions on whether we should be touring at all, whether it's a good idea. We are currently in a country which isn't locked down, and we're traveling. We've got upcoming plans. Our next trip is going to be trekking. We've left our bikes in Pakistan, but because of the weather now, we have to go in the opposite direction to get them back. So we're basically going to walk from Nepal to get our bikes in Pakistan. So we have kept really close contact with local guidelines in the countries that we're going to, and also kind of kept close contact with local people to see what the opinion is. We could have gone to Pakistan in spring when we planned, but at that time the opinion in the country was really they didn't want tourists coming. They were scared of the virus coming in. They didn't think that they were prepared for it. So at that time we made the decision not to go. Now the opinion seems much more that people are really suffering from lack of tourism, that there are procedures in place, that there's enough masks, there's enough alcohol hand gel, and there's robust procedures for quarantine and testing in the countries that we're going to. So it definitely makes traveling more difficult at the moment. Everything's taking time, even things like supply issues for getting gear to where you're leaving from, everything's taking longer. Things like timing your COVID test. So we had to get a COVID test to apply for our Nepali visa. We'll then need to get another COVID test before we take the flight. We then need to arrange a hotel that's happy for us to quarantine in the hotel. It's not clear how many days we need to quarantine for. Some people say 7, some people say 10, some people say 14. We're going to go for 14 just to be on the safest side. And then we'll need to get another test at the end of the quarantine period before we can travel. It's a really personal decision, like a lot of things in life. I don't think that you can say that everyone should be traveling. I don't think that you can say that everyone shouldn't be traveling. But I think we feel that we've taken as many steps as we can to minimize the risk as much as possible. And yeah.
I think that's it, isn't it? You've just got to make informed choices. It sounds like you've been really thorough in that decision then. Okay, did you have any major bike failures on this trip?
No, we didn't. We didn't have one single puncture. So if you are looking for the best touring tires, they are Marathon Plus Tour by Schwalbe. They were incredible. We had a couple of minor issues, mostly with kind of the setup of the bike packing bags and things like that, but Antoine was really on it in terms of mechanics. Every time we stopped, every time we were anywhere, kind of in a hotel, or if we had a bit of time, he would oil the chains, check the tension on all of the cables, reinflate the tires. He was really on it with kind of preventative stuff, and I think that really helped avoid big issues. So
brilliant. Okay, in terms of seasonality, do you know when the optimal window to head to the Pamir highway is?
So most people do it in June or July. June, I think, probably would be the better option. I think in July it starts getting, but those are the two recommended periods. It was definitely possible in May, apart from that first pass that we did, which we found out later was actually closed because of the snow. It was just cold. So if you're prepared for the cold, then May would be fine. But I think that June and July are more recommended.
Great. Can you say the name of the tyres again? People.
Yes. So the brand is Schwalbe. It's I think it's a German brand, so it's SCHWALBE, something like that, and it's Marathon Plus Tour.
Great, top tips, love it. Okay, just a couple more. I feel like this is like a mastermind hotspot. But just to say to everyone, I can see there's still questions coming in, but there is so much information on Clare's website, Doc Gone Wild, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's some great blog posts, but also loads of really great tips for people who want to try and go on similar sorts of trips. So yeah, do check it out.
Yeah. And you can also send me any questions that don't get answered here. You can send me. We're probably most contactable via Instagram, but through the website as well. We'll try and answer people's questions if we don't get to them today.
Right, I've lost it now. Oh, what was your most essential spare part or tool for bike maintenance?
I didn't really do very much bike maintenance. Antoine was essential. What we really loved was we had a miniature track pump, and it's a toe peak. I don't remember the name of the model, but that's definitely on my website. On it, we did an article on what we were taking when we went on our Africa trip, and that's in there. And that was really, really useful, especially because we quite often had to like deflate the tires and take them apart for transport. And it's a really, really light pump, but it has little foot pedals, so you can really get the pressure. And the other thing would probably be our Toe Peak multi-tool, which is just a standard multi-tool, but really well designed, really sturdy. Oh, and I guess cable ties and wire, like, what do you call that? Just bits of wire to attach everything back together that broke on the bags. That was pretty essential as well.
Yeah. Cable ties are always a top tip, aren't they?
Yeah.
Okay, last one, I think. Did you have any contacts in any of the countries beforehand who sort of helped you with arranging things? Or
no, for these countries we didn't. We spent quite a lot of time looking at blog posts, different people's videos from the area to try and get an idea of what the country was going to be like. But we didn't have anyone on the ground that could tell us things like what the weather was like, different issues like that. We didn't have any contacts in the country, and now that we're going back to Nepal and Pakistan, we do have contacts in the country. It definitely helps, but it's also definitely possible to do without. In terms of there is information out there especially from, we found blogs to be really useful because they're people who've done similar things to us and who had been there more recently, but there are guidebooks and things as well which are useful.
Brilliant. Sorry, I said that was the last one, but I've just seen one that I really want to hear the answer to. This could be the last one. If you could change one thing about the trip, what would it have been?
The food in Tajikistan. No, I think the thing I would have changed would be the weather for the section when we were in Saritash in Kyrgyzstan, because in the end we definitely would have had the time to do what we planned to do, to go and trek to base camp of Peak Lenin, and then also to carry on up to Osh. But I think we made the right decision considering how bad the weather was in the section that wasn't hit by a storm. I think if we had pushed on, because we were conscious of the time, I think if we pushed on to either of the other places, we'd have been in quite a lot of trouble. But if I could change something, I would change the weather at that time, so that we could have carried on and did a bit of the trip. But apart from that, I think everywhere we went to, I think we passed by the correct route. I'm happy with the time of year that we went, even if it was tricky. It meant that we were really alone on the roads. Yeah, I think apart from that, I think it's pretty good.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been a lovely afternoon hearing about all of this. So yeah, just to let everyone know, the film that these guys made about this trip is on the film section of the Cycletorian website. So if you want to see more of that amazing imagery or hear more about the trip, you could
find out what happened to the drone.
Find out what happened to it. Lots of people have been putting in the chat that they've watched the film already and how amazing it is. So definitely check that one out. And there's a top tip coming back for you, Claire, from the chat as well, which is if you do need to stealth camp, don't take a bright orange tent next time.
That is a very, very good point.
But yeah, thank you so much. It's been really great to
get
your chats, and we'll look forward to hearing more about your trips in the future, I'm sure, at future festivals. So yeah,
that'd be good. Cool. Well, thank you to everyone who's been listening from home. Thanks for all your comments, your questions. And as I said, if you've got any questions that haven't been answered or anything you think of, then definitely just get in touch. We really like to encourage people that want to do some other trips, and to share what we learned from our trips.
Cool. Okay. Well, enjoy the rest of the festival, everyone. We'll see you again another time. All right. Bye.
Bye.